Everybody, this is David, MSOM 601, coming to you today from the outside deck. It's a nice, actually cool morning here in Dallas, so anytime you have a cool morning, it's sit on the deck and drink a cup of coffee. So, yeah, I got sticking out like alfalfa today. Anyway, you don't need to hear that. Let's review Lesson 5, and then let's talk about Lesson 6 a little bit. Lesson 5 is one of my favorites because it goes back to my old sales background, and one of the most important things that you do in sales is assess your audience. And so discussion question 1 talked about the importance of accurately assessing your audience. And this begins well before you take a trip into see them. You have to do your homework on these things. The other thing that I really wanted to stress, and hopefully you saw my discussion comments, I began to participate a bit in these and make some comments, is that not only do you need to assess the audience that's sitting in front of you, but assess the audience downstream, because many times those are the people who have to implement what you're going to ask them to do. There'll be some end results that happen on those types of people, so just don't think about the audience being the people who are sitting across the table from you. Think about the people who are going to be impacted by the decisions and the recommendations that you make. So again, very good dialogue on this one. Discussion 2, again, one of my favorites because it talks about audiences, conflicts, and the challenges that you have in problem solving. I love this video, and again, as I mentioned, you're going to be, I think you see that video again in the negotiation class if you take that one going forward. But one of the key things that you have to be able to do is make sure that you hear what the audience is saying. And sometimes that's verbal, sometimes it's nonverbal. But way too often when you're you come in with a negotiating position to solve a problem or something, you're really focused on making sure that you tell everybody what your opinions are. And too often when you're talking, you're not listening. And so it's very important to be able to go to the balcony, as they said in this video, because when you're in the balcony, you can assess things much differently than when you're right on the stage and in the middle. And so it gives you the opportunity to take a step back, to be able to become the third part, the third person, if you will, in a two-person negotiation sometimes. And so really focus on that one, and I would keep that video link for you in your business because I just think it's so important. And there are such great concepts in there, and I talked a little bit about those 3 concepts in my comment on the discussion boards as well. So if you haven't had a chance to read that book, the Walk from No to Yes, I would encourage you to do that as well. And as I think that book is part of the Negotiating Skills ebook system. But if not, you can find excerpts from it in different places on the internet. So that was discussion 2. And the case study this week was one that really demonstrated conversations gone amok, if you will, because it focused on getting it wrong and then getting it right between Jessica and Monica. And this could really be anybody. But one of the key things I think happened in this discussion, particularly on the getting it wrong portion, is that if you look at the red model, hello red, if you look at the red model and understand the first one is recognize assumptions, both Jessica and Monica brought some degree of assumptions into this conversation. And quite frankly, on the getting it wrong portion, it didn't go any further than that because they were never able to go past the assumptions that they had as they brought it in. Remember, they brought up some prior things that happened. I mean, how many times has that happened to you? I mean, you say, okay, I need to have I'm going to have a meeting with this person. Well, the first thing you think about is the last time you had a meeting with that person, and you bring in that baggage if it was a negative conversation, or you bring in the good parts of that if it was a great conversation. So the assumptions that you have in that environment is that this current discussion we're going to have is going to be exactly like the last one. And so you have to make sure that you look at that as you go forward, because if you don't recognize those types of assumptions that you have that you're bringing in, then chances are you may not ever make it to evaluating arguments or drawing conclusions because you're still hung up on the last time we met it went awful. And so therefore this one's going to go awful. So I come in defensive, you come in defensive, and so on and so on. So hopefully you get the meaning and the application for that particular case study this week. All right? That was lesson 5. Lesson 6 begins to talk about subject matter experts. It begins to talk about organizational honesty and those types of things. So the first discussion question this week talks about picking subject matter experts. And this is an important one because if you look at Amina's story and all the details of Amina's story, there are several different subject matter experts in there. And many of the people, based upon their thinking style and thinking skills, were subject matter experts for that particular part of Amina's story. And so make sure that you look at that because part of your requirement for the course project requires you to talk about subject matter experts. The video this week, though, if you can tell, I always like to take some counter-arguments on these as well. And so the video this week focuses on when to use subject matter experts and perhaps when not to use subject matter experts. We may be in business today so enamored with subject matter experts that we forget to think on our own. And we begin to take the advice, the words of the subject matter experts ad nauseum and really relegate our thinking, our critical thinking to other people because we think they are a subject matter expert. So the video this week hopefully gave you some thoughts, or this coming week gave you some thoughts on when to use subject matter experts, but also when not to use them or not to overuse them, okay? Discussion 2 talks about organizational honesty. Now hear me on this. I don't want you to think about honesty in the traditional sense of you and I having a discussion and telling the truth, you know, on things. Organizational honesty to me is much deeper than that. It's really about what are the things that are working in our organization, what are the things that aren't working when we strip away all the prejudices that we have, perhaps because we built the last program, so we think it's the greatest program in the world. Well, it may be dated, it may, you know, the consumer may be different today. And so many of the times, and I mentioned this in a couple of the comments, I think, we'll do a SWOT analysis and we'll talk about strengths and we will have a laundry list of strengths of our company or of us, our department. And then when it comes to weaknesses, we may have 1 or 2. I mean, come on. We ought to be able to assess ourselves much better than that. We get a lockjaw when we start talking about our weaknesses. Or our weaknesses are actually hidden strengths. It's like, well, the weakness of my team and of me is that we just care too much. You know, those types of things. So organizational honesty strips that away. And one of the things that I posted, and I posted this last week, I don't know if any of you happen to see it yet or not, but I posted the follow-up to the book Good to Great by Jim Collins. There's a book review that I put in doc sharing. And in doc sharing, the review really talks about How the Mighty Fall. It was his follow-up book. And so part of that becomes you just get so enamored with yourself and your organization that you aren't honest with yourself on your strengths, your weaknesses, and so on and so on. And so make sure you have a very robust discussion on this and just don't focus on we need to not lie to each other. I mean, okay. So let's focus on it more from the perspective of true organizational honesty, all right? And then the case study this week deals with a story. I love this story. I'm a big fan of that genre, but it talks about Silver Blaze. It talks about, you know, written by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, and it talks about Sherlock Holmes and how he asks questions. I mean, he asks very probing questions on things. And the same thing happens in business today. We may take something and just make an assumption about it and not ask the probing question. So when we're dealing with other people trying to solve that particular problem, we may be solving 2 different elements of that problem. And so the importance here and the message here is that we need to have complete, unaltered data whenever we go about solving problems. Or what may happen is we may put a team together and say, okay, what I want you to do is I'll come back with a solution to this problem, and I may be solving one element of the problem, you may be solving another element, and when we all get back together, we have completely different approaches, not because it's being creative, but because we're solving different problems, or we're solving different pieces of a problem because we're only looking at a small portion of it. So this is a key part of asking questions. This goes back to the Einstein quote a couple of weeks ago, is being able to ask the questions up front so that we narrow down what we're going to be solving to very early in the process. All right? So that is lesson 6. 2 more weeks to go. I bet you all are excited. If you have any questions or comments, make sure you get in touch with me. In the meantime, have a great week. Keep studying. Talk to you soon.